Okay, very good. We're gonna hit record, and in doing so, you are aware that and by participating, you're aware that we are recording you and you're giving your consent. All right, so today, I don't know, I feel a little sad. It's the last in our series for this spring. And I just want to give a shout out to Ashley for all her hard work in putting this together. It's always her prodding me along, and I'm glad to assist. But today we're going to focus on easy flowers for integrating into your vegetable gardens. And this is a little bit of a new topic, so we're excited to share it with you. You can forward. All right. So with University of Maryland Extension Master Gardener Program, we focus on presenting programs in many different areas, but these are the main ones in native plants, composting, pollinators, baywise, grow it, eat it, and plant clinics, which you may have attended or seen at your local farmers markets or other venues. Today's program is a grow it, eat it program. And we always like to remind people who we are. We are University of Maryland Extension, and we are part of the College of Agriculture and Natural Resources. And there are extension offices in all 23 of our counties in Baltimore City. I am from Allegheny County. I am the Master Gardener Coordinator there, and Ashley is the Master Gardener Coordinator in Garrett County. So we like to remind you that we offer our programs free of discrimination, and you have the right to accommodations if you need them, reasonable accommodations. We do need a little notice, but you have the right to that. Next slide. And at this point, we're going to do a demographic poll. It's because we receive federal funding, and we are required by law to collect demographic information on participants in our program to ensure that our programs are delivered in a non-discriminatory way. And it also helps us to measure our effectiveness in offering these programs in an inclusive way. But you do not have to participate if you do not want to. But we're going to have Ashley put out that poll. It's a few questions. And then when you're finished, make sure you hit enter so your responses can be recorded.
Just a quick note that there are 6 questions, so make sure that you enter all of them. And the sooner we get this, the sooner we'll move right along to our fun content for the day. Thank you all for your help.
So I don't know about you, Ashley, but I've been busy trying to get my plants in the ground lately. Had nice weather this weekend.
Yes, did you get rain this morning? It should be a welcome shower. It's kind of getting a little dry.
Yeah, kind of helped water in some of the things I planted yesterday, so that was good. I got some tomatoes and cucumbers in. I guess I'm rolling the dice a little bit because our last frost date in Garrett County is the end of May or June 1st. So we'll see how that goes out.
I was thinking that too. It seems like I'm behind, but we're really not. But it just kind of feels like, I don't know.
Yeah, because it's been the leaves are bursting out on the trees and stuff's flowering, so you feel like summer's here.
That's right. We're always happy to see it here in the Western Maryland. It seems like it takes a while for it to roll back around.
That's right. That's right.
All right, lady. I think we can probably move on along.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, everyone, for participating in the poll. All right. So we always like to start out right away reminding folks about this excellent resource from our Master Gardener program, that is a chart that will help you in planting your vegetable garden, help give you pointers on when to start your seeds indoors or to plant them outside, depending on whether they're cool season or warm season vegetables. And also it's very handy if you do succession planting to know, how long of a open window do I have for succession planting. And that's especially helpful for your cool season vegetables that you can plant on the shoulder seasons in the spring and the fall. So I encourage you to check out that excellent resource. All right, so we're gonna focus on the reasons why should we integrate flowers into our vegetable gardens, and there's lots of good reasons for that. So some of those reasons, and this is just a summary of what we're going to talk about here, is because they're important in building habitat and creating diversity in your yard, because they provide structural diversity, food sources, nesting sites, places for critters to reproduce. Some plants are very necessary, in fact, for insect reproduction. They also attract pollinators, which can be very beneficial, and we'll talk about the reasons why. And some of these plants actually may help to deter pests. And then herbs have a special role in the fact that they can attract pollinators and help, be host plants for insects, but we can also eat them. And they're great to incorporate into the recipes where we're going to use all those fruits and vegetables that we're growing. So it's important to have a variety of different types of plants in your landscape. And I like this picture because it shows a structural variegation from all the way from the bottom, the floor of the woods here or your yard, all the way up to tree canopies. So it's important to have things at every level, this vertical stratification. So at the bottom, we have our perennials or annuals, your herbaceous plants, and they can provide food for all kinds of animals, shelter, nectar sources, and can be larval host sites for many different insects. And then you move up to shrubs, which also provide nesting sites, hiding places in the winter, especially if they're evergreens. It's great for birds, as well as food sources. And then you have your understory and overstory trees that also provide those different kinds of things. And in fact, I don't know if you're aware, but many tree species are extremely important in the life cycle of a variety of insects. And as we'll see in the next slide, that birds really depend on a variety of insects, and not only birds. If you think about our entire ecosystem, the bottom level of our trophic system starts with plants. Plants take the sunlight and they are producers. They make their own food. And then all the rest of the animal world depends on them either directly or indirectly for food. And then right above the plants would be insects. So the insects eat the plants, but there are so many different kinds of organisms that eat insects, including insects. So they're a very important level in our ecosystems, and we need to create a diverse habitat in order to benefit these insects, which then in turn reproduce and provide a variety of food sources for all the other organisms in our ecosystem, including us. Next slide. So some of the reasons to integrate flowers is to attract pollinators and beneficial insects. So we're going to focus on attracting beneficial insects at this point. And any plant in the aster, mint, or carrot family is an excellent choice to incorporate into your vegetable garden or flower garden. And some plants in the aster family would include chamomile or cosmos or zinnias or tansy. An example of carrot family would be dill and fennel and Queen Anne's lace, parsley, okay? And mint is kind of self-explanatory. We know about a lot of mints, but some you might not be familiar with, might be bee balm. Bee balm is in the mint family. And I like these pictures on here. If you'll notice, we have a caterpillar on the bottom part of the slide. I believe this is a black swallowtail butterfly. Now I'm going to focus on butterflies and specifically for the moment. If you're familiar with their life cycle, they start out as eggs and then they move to larva and then the pupa or the cocoon and then the adult stage. Now adults are going to feed on, they're going to get their nectar and pollen from quite a variety of different flower sources, and they're not quite as particular about where they get their nectar and pollen from. However, as with many insects, especially butterflies, they have to have very specific host plants on which to lay their eggs in order for when those larvae hatch out, they get the correct nutrition that they need in order to develop to go to the next stage. So you'll see with this black swallowtail butterfly caterpillar, it's on dill. So it depends on plants in the carrot family in order to reproduce. Next slide. So what are some of our beneficial insects? Well, there's lots out there. There are some that are pest insects. There's some that are beneficial, particularly, and many are just, they are, right? They're just part of the ecosystem and we don't need to worry about trying to eliminate them. In fact, we should encourage them because they're all part of the food chain. So some reasons why we consider some insects beneficial is because they're either pollinators or predators. So some of our pollinators include beetles such as soldier beetles, lightning bugs, like you see a picture here on the slide. In fact, their larvae will eat a lot of pest insects, and the adults help to be pollinators. And then we have different kinds of flies. You may have heard of syrphid flies. They kind of look like little bees. They're good pollinators. Different wasps, which we'll talk about in a moment, and a variety of bees. And in Maryland, we have over 400 species of bees. And in North America, I think over 4,000. So honeybees are extremely important in the pollination process, but they in fact are not native. So keep that in mind. And then there are other arthropods that your diversity in your garden can support, such as spiders, centipedes, and millipedes. Next slide. So flowering plants attract and conserve beneficials that help them are ones that have relatively open blossoms, and plants in that category you will find in Asteraceae, Apiaceae, and Polygonaceae families. Those are very good choices because they tend to have those small open blossoms. And buckwheat, this is a great one to incorporate, especially, this is a great cover crop. It's a summer cover crop. It doesn't make it through the winter. And you can incorporate it in between your plantings. And pollinators just love this. And Ashley, I know this is one of your favorites. Is there anything that you would like to share in particular about buckwheat?
No, that it's just a fun, like you said, it works well as a cover crop. I'm going to try using it as an interplanting this year in between crops throughout the growing season as trying to deter weeds and deter other pests. So I'm excited to try that. It will self-seed, so just be forewarned that once you plant it, if you let it go to seed, you may have it for several future years. But it's a fun one to try.
Yeah, I tried it and it was nice. It attracted pollinators. I didn't have too much trouble with it like taking over or anything. So it was a good one. All right, so now we're going to talk about beneficial insects as predators, and we have examples on this slide of a variety of different ones we consider to be particularly beneficial. In the upper left-hand side, you see the lacewing. The adults only feed on nectar and pollen, but in the slide next to it is really cool. You see their eggs, which they actually lay on little stalks. And the reason is because when they hatch out, they are such voracious predators, they will eat one another. So these stalks even have barbs that point backwards that prevent the larva from climbing up the stalk and then down the stalk to eat their brothers and sisters. So that's pretty interesting. And in this other slide right next to it in the right hand upper corner, we see the larva of the lacewing, which another name for it is aphid lion, because it loves eating aphids. I think it's like each larva may eat about 1,000 in its lifetime. So that's pretty awesome. And then you see in the bottom left-hand corner, you see the ladybird beetle larva, which is another great predator on those pest insects such as aphids and whiteflies and what else? Thrips. And they also will eat the eggs of other problem insects or the larva. So they're awesome. And then on the other slides, we see some other predators. I think these are the assassin bugs. Yeah. And as adults, they will feed on other insects. All right, next slide. And this is one you may not think about very often, but there are some tiny little wasps out there that are parasitoids on problem insects. And in the top left corner, you see a tomato hornworm that a braconid wasp has laid eggs on, and eventually this is going to kill that caterpillar. And then we see in the lower left corner an aphid, a mummified aphid. Okay, that's why it's brown and you see a hole in the back of it. So this little wasp guy here down the center, bottom of the slide, this aphid wasp actually lay 1 egg per aphid in the inside of the aphid, and the larva will hatch out and actually eat the aphid from the inside out and then pop out when it's ready to go to the next stage of its life cycle. So these are some really helpful insects that help us to control our pest insect populations. So parasitoids in particular benefit from the blossoms of wild parsnips, carrots, buttercups, and other wildflowers. Some of those open, small flowers. So another reason to integrate the flowers into your vegetable gardens and flower beds is because some of them actually can deter pests. Now, plants will emit chemical signals, and this can be through the air, or they will put chemicals into the ground. And some of these chemicals can attract beneficial insects and repel some that are not so beneficial. And Nasturtium is an example of one of those plants that can actually repel some insects from your beans and cabbages. They can deter whiteflies, cucumber beetles, and squash bugs. But you know, I guess the kind of mixed reviews. In some trials, they did attract pests. Like I have noticed that I get a lot of aphids on my nasturtiums. So I don't know if they act as a trap crop or not, but I guess we need some more research on this. Next slide. Marigolds are another interesting one. They don't get along with some vegetables, which Ashley is going to talk about here in some future slides. However, if you have a problem with root knot nematodes in your soil and they attack a variety of plants, but they can be a problem for your root crops, you might want to consider planting French marigolds in those areas of your garden where you have that problem, because they put out a chemical that actually helps to control root knot nematodes. But they can also put out some chemicals into the soil that are allelopathic, and they do not get along well with beans and cabbages. Next slide. So we're going to focus a little bit on herbs here and why they're a great choice to integrate into your garden. They have a variety of benefits, but mainly, you get to eat them too, right? So as well as, inviting beneficial insects into your garden, you can make use of them in your food preparation. So they have culinary uses. They smell great. You can incorporate them into potpourris. They have medicinal qualities. You can make teas out of them. You can have fun themed gardens like a pizza garden. You can have tomatoes and basil and peppers growing in the same bed. And they're great for companion planting as well as inviting in those beneficial insects into your yard and garden, either as being larval host plants or providing nectar and pollen through their flowers. And they may deter pests as well. Okay, so just real briefly talk about harvesting and preserving herbs. It's best to collect your early in the morning when you're going to have the greatest concentration of essential oils in there, but you also want the dew to be dried off of them before you collect them. Pick the flowers when they are fully open, and the seeds, you're going to need to be patient and wait till they're fully ripe, such as with fennel or dill or cilantro, which the seed of that one is coriander in particular. And then you can also use the leaves. So some ways to preserve them, it could be drying them, hanging the herbs upside down in a cool, dry place, not in direct sunlight. And you need to have good air circulation so they don't get moldy. And you can also freeze them. So you can rinse them and then pat them dry, cut them in small pieces and put them in a wax paper or ice cube tray or in freezer bags. And that's another great way to save your herbs. Okay, and at this point, I'm going to hand it over to Ashley, and she's going to talk about companion planting.
All right. Thank you, Sherry. I appreciate that introduction. So we are going to talk now about some ways that you can, so reasons that you want to incorporate these flowers. Sherry covered in depth. And one way that we can integrate these flowers into our vegetable garden is through companion planting. So maybe you've heard of that, or maybe you haven't, but it's basically just the science and art of planting more than one crop together in hopes that they will interact well together and that they will, provide some sort of benefit to both plants that are growing in that location. So I have to kind of preface this session with there is some, I guess, contradicting information out there on, what plants grow really well together or what plants don't grow really well together. And it kind of comes down to, I think it's kind of specific to your own location and your own situation and what critters you have in your landscape or what critters you don't have in your landscape. So if you look up extension sources, like we always recommend that you do, you may find a hard time finding hard and fast rules that say you have to plant this side by side or you don't have to plant this side by side. So my recommendation is that you give it a try. If you have something that you absolutely love, a flower that you love for a specific reason, I suggest that you do some of your own research and see what works in your own situation. So with that being said, there are a couple different ways that your companion plantings are going to work together. So as Sherry talked about, just by increasing your biodiversity, anytime we have a monoculture situation where one plant is planted, over and over and over again in the garden, that creates a monoculture where there's just one thing. So you're only going to have specific pests that like that crop. So by increasing your biodiversity, by increasing the amount of plants you have in that area, it's going to automatically increase the amount of critters, good and bad, that you're going to have in the garden. We talked a little bit about pest control and how does that work. Some plants are going to, exude certain chemicals that other plants are not going to like or other insects are not going to like. So that's like a biochemical pest control tactic. There's also something called trap cropping, which Sherry mentioned a little bit, and that is where you plant one crop that you really don't care if you get to harvest or not. You plant that and you kind of sacrifice it, or that's where all the bad bugs are going to go to, and then they're going to leave your other plant alone. So that's called trap cropping or sacrificial crops. And then we have relationships like symbiotic relationships, which is a kind of a big word, but that's what happens when both plants are going to benefit. So that happens like with legumes, whenever they form symbiotic relationships with the nodules on their roots, and they can actually capture nitrogen out of the air, and then the legume can use that nitrogen. And then in return for the bacteria doing that, they get all the sugars that they need to live there on the roots as well. Again, increasing your crop diversity, we talk a little bit about this with biodiversity. That's just going to give you the opportunity to have more plants coming off of your small plot of land or your area that's devoted to your garden. And then also physical interaction, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that, but that's where you would use one plant to maybe grow up another one, or another plant to provide shade, which another plant may really benefit from. So lots of different ways that this companion planting can work. And we're going to focus on flowers now that provide these different benefits to the plants in our garden. So there was also a term that Sherry mentioned, allelopathy. So that's basically the fact that some plants exude certain hormones that other plants don't like. So the classic example that you hear a lot is black walnut. So its roots actually have some jugulan, which is a chemical that they exude to kind of help other plants not grow around it. So it's Mother Nature's way of ensuring that that plant will survive. So you never want to plant a garden or flowers underneath a black walnut tree because you're not going to have very good results there. And with pest control, if we're trying to do pest control with companion planting, a lot of times we're going to focus a lot on heavily scented herbs, different colors, different shapes, and then also plants that maybe you don't care as much about if the pest goes to that. So Sherry mentioned here in this photo, this is the backside of a nasturtium leaf, and you can see that there are black aphids on there. Most people plant nasturtiums just for their beauty or like as a trap crop, so we don't worry too much about the aphids maybe being there, especially if it's keeping them off of one of our more prized plants like our peppers or something like that. And then physical interaction, this is a great example, is the Three Sisters garden. So you probably have heard about that, but it's where you plant 3 different crops in a small area. You plant sweet corn, which acts as a stake for a pole bean, which then grows up the corn. And then the third plant in this situation or this planting is going to be either a squash or pumpkin, which helps to cover the ground. It helps to lock in moisture and it helps to prevent weeds. So in the corn, it loves the nitrogen that the bean is going to produce. And then of course the corn is also the pole for the bean. So you get 3 different crops basically off of one area of your garden. So how do you start with companion planting? Sometimes people can get a little overwhelmed because there's not just an easy resource. There's not a lot of handouts that you can just hand somebody and say, okay, this plant is going to grow perfectly with this other plant. So it's kind of a little bit overwhelming, but again, like I said at the beginning, if you can just start somewhere, start with one plant and maybe that you have a particular problem with, and do a little research and see what other plant may grow well with it. That's usually the easiest place to go. There are some kind of rules. Plants of the same family, you probably don't want to always put side by side, and that goes back to more of crop rotation because they're going to also have more pest problems. They're going to use the same nutrients in the soil. So spreading, from year to year, rotate your crops in your garden. That's a great thing to do. And plants with similar root zones. So a lot of times if you don't want to grow potatoes and carrots together because they're going to utilize that same space in your vegetable garden, the underneath space. So we're going to go through just in general some guidelines on what you can and cannot plant together. So the words here at the top of the slide for the next several are going to be what we're talking about. And then the plants underneath are what grow well together as a companion. And then towards the end, we're going to get more into just specific flowers. So if you have beans and peas, some plants that you can consider growing together would be potatoes, corn, squash, cucumbers, summer savory, dill. You can also use pole beans to create shade for lettuce underneath. Okay, it's not recommended that you plant beans and peas with anything in the onion family or marigolds. And then we have the cabbage family. So they like plants with strong smells. So anything like your dills, any plant that has, a really strong scent is going to do well with your cabbage family because that helps to confuse some of the cabbage moths and other pests that they have. Potatoes, here's a photo that you can see. The plants in the center are like cauliflower or maybe broccoli with potatoes on the side. All right, I'm gonna Okay. And then it's recommended that you don't put marigolds in with your cabbages. And then we have carrots. So carrots grow well with almost anything, particularly onions. You do want to keep them away from dill and parsnips. And then here's an example of what we were saying, like you can use a pole bean or something here on a trellis to create some shade for shade-loving plants like lettuce underneath. Other things that grow well with lettuce would be onions and root crops. They can be sensitive to decaying rye. So if you do a cover crop with like winter rye or something like that, you can get a little bit of seeds not wanting to germinate quite as well. So just be cautious of that. An onion family, they do really well with anything except for things in the legumes. So stay away from, this is a picture of peanuts, but other things would be beans and peas. And then we have potatoes. They do well with beans and other plants that grow fast in the early spring. It's not recommended that you plant potatoes with your tomatoes, raspberries, or squash. And here we have the squash family. So here's another picture of the beginning of the Three Sisters garden here on the right-hand side. So squashes do really well with beans and corn. Radishes can be a really nice addition because, you know, of course, they're going to be a short season crop. So they're usually going to be mature in about 30 days. So you'll be harvesting them long before your beans or your corn is ready. And there's even some research about nasturtiums, and I've planted nasturtiums and radishes with my squash and my cucumbers for the last several years, and I think it's been a great benefit. Tomatoes grow great with basil. That's one of my other favorite companion plantings that I do every year. They can be very sensitive to black walnuts, so be forewarned of that. And tomatoes also like anything in the onions or garlic or any other strong smelling herbs. So now we're going to move into some specific flowers that do well with an addition to your vegetable garden, and that can, again, bring some of these nice companion planting features or some of the reasons that Sherry talked about earlier. So zinnias are probably one of my favorite flowers to plant in the vegetable garden. And a couple of reasons include they germinate very quickly in the early summer. So you can plant them right along with your warm season crops. And they also provide great pollinator services. So a lot of times you'll see them covered in butterflies and bees, which is always nice to see in your vegetable garden. And once the pollinators are there for the zinnias, they'll find other things to pollinate. So it's a great partnership. And they also make great cut flowers. So it's a nice thing to have if you want to, you know, add some flowers to your table or bring them inside to enjoy. Sunflowers are another group that I really enjoy putting in the vegetable garden. And they're obviously a pretty traditional plant that a lot of people do put in their vegetable gardens. But it always amazes me at how many critters, particularly honeybees and bumblebees and native bees that you'll see covering the heads of the sunflowers. So I always tell people that they make a nice place to make shade also, so you can plant other things nearby them in the shade. And they make such wonderful varieties now, like that are much smaller, so you don't have to worry about having, you know, necessarily 8-foot sunflowers if you don't want that. And oftentimes with these smaller varieties, the more often you cut them off, the more often that the flowers will continue to bloom throughout the season. So, you know, be mindful of that, you know, it's not just something that you're going to cut once and then you're going to be done with it. If you want to let them continue to produce flowers all season long, just snip them off as often as you can. And then we have cosmos, which is another great addition to the vegetable garden because, again, they're a warm season crop, so they're going to coincide very nicely with all of the other plants that you're going to have out there. They also, again, provide pollinator services, so they're going to be really sweet smelling, so they're going to bring in a lot of nice native bees, very easy to germinate, and they also, again, work well for cut flowers if you are interested in doing that. And then we have sweet alyssum, which is something that maybe you have thought or have not thought about. But there's been several studies and some research done on the benefit of planting sweet alyssum with like cabbage and cole crops, because again, it does help to bring in pollinators, which those crops don't necessarily need, but they found that it can also, again, they're doing research on it, but they found that it can also help deter, again, some of like the other cole crop pests. So these were some photos, and I often tell people you should not necessarily rely on blogs for information, because it's a lot of opinion sometimes and not always a lot of facts. But these were some really good photos that I found from a blog, and you can see they planted Swiss chard along with their alyssum. And I did read that white alyssum is a little bit better as a pollinator attractant, as compared to some of like the purplish and pink varieties. And then we're going to move into some more edible flowers. So plants that you definitely can eat the flowers of, in addition to your vegetables. So a nasturtium is, again, probably the reason that I got into doing some of this type of companion planting. We started again planting these with our cucumbers because we had an awful infestation of cucumber beetles in our high tunnel. So we started planting nasturtiums, and the thing about them is that they will self-seed. So once you start planting them, it's a good possibility that you're going to have them for a long time to come. They will take full sun, full shade, well, light shade. They'll take full sun for sure. And I've planted them underneath like my high tunnel tomatoes where they get, you know, a decent amount of shade. The early on slide also said that maybe they prefer poor soils. I find that to not really affect them too much because again, I have them in a high fertility area with my high tunnel crops, and they seem to just thrive and do just fine. So you can get different varieties, compact versus trailing. You can plant them with radishes, cabbage, and anything in the cucurbit family, and even under fruit trees. And then we have chives. So we tried to stay away from a lot of perennial plants because they really wouldn't work that well in a traditional vegetable garden where you're going to be tilling it every season. So we recommend, you know, putting some of these perennials maybe at the edge where you wouldn't till, or if you have like a raised bed, devoting part of that raised bed to just perennial chives. And they grow really well with anything else in the onion family. We found some guidance that said that they do well under apple trees. They can be planted with carrots, strawberries, and even tomatoes. And the flowers on them are just beautiful, so they make a nice addition, like a garnish, and they would be edible as well. And then we have cilantro. So most people don't necessarily think about the flower as being something that you want to harvest, but it does make a beautiful flower and a great pollinator attractant. And since it is on an herb, it would be edible. I'm not sure that it would be the best tasting, but if you really like cilantro, then it may be one of your favorite new additions. As Sherry said, you know, if you eat the foliage of cilantro, then that's what we call it. If you let it go to flower and produce seeds, then it's called coriander. So it grows really well with basil, mint, and yarrow are great companions for it. You can even include it with jalapeno peppers and onions, and you have everything you need for a salsa garden, which I thought that might be something fun to try. And then we have basil. So again, we already talked a little bit about this, but basil grows wonderfully with tomatoes. And some of the other additions that you can put basil with would be asparagus, borage, chamomile, oregano, and chives, marigolds, peppers, and then different root vegetables. So like parsnips, radishes, and turnips. A lot of the research that I read about basil said that because it's such a strong herb, it often will help bring out some of the other strong flavors and other essential oils in some of the other herbs that you plant it nearby. So that's kind of interesting. And then we have dill, another one of my favorites because it is just so easy to grow. As Sherry said, it's a great larval source for some butterflies. So that's a great reason to put it out there and to put extra out there. Again, it will self-seed if you don't collect the seeds, and you can never collect all of them. So that's kind of a fun thing to see popping up in your vegetable garden. All parts of it are edible, so you can, eat the flower head even when it's younger. Obviously, you wouldn't want to wait until it gets too dark or too brown. It wouldn't be nearly as palatable. But even the foliage of dill is edible, so that's kind of interesting and fun. Some plants like Nasturtium, Marigolds, they make great companion plantings with dill, as well as brassicas. So anything, in the cole crop family, asparagus, cucumbers, and tomatoes. And then we have chamomile. This is another one that I tried a few years ago. It makes a great addition to, again, your brassicas because it has such a strong scent to it. The thought is that it can help kind of camouflage your brassica crops and keep them safe from some of our other butterflies and moths that are going to be some of our insect pests on them. Basil works well. I also read that it can be planted underneath fruit trees and also with cucumbers. And there are two types of chamomile. There's English and Roman. Either one of them can be used as the companion planting. And then we have borage, which is going to be these big, beautiful purplish blue flowers. And here's a picture where it's planted with calendula here at the bottom. Another nice addition with an edible flower. A lot of people think it tastes very similar to cucumbers. So some people will freeze it in like in ice cube trays and then use it as like in water and that sort of thing. It can also be planted with all of these plants. So tomatoes, cabbage, strawberries, peas, beans, cucumbers, squash, and even grapes. I'm growing it for the first time this year, so I'm excited to see how it does and see what other benefits it will provide for the garden. Then, of course, we have pansies, which tend to be a little bit more of a cool season plant or flower. So you can try planting those with kale or cabbages or even Swiss chard and parsley. They can really give you a nice mix of different textures and foliages in your garden. So that's something interesting to try. And of course, the flowers are edible as well. And marigolds are probably the #1 known plant that people often put in the vegetable garden. So they're, they can grow with almost anything and do just fine. And then we have calendula, another what most people consider an herb, but most of the time the flowers are going to be used for it. I just planted it as a landscape plant. We planted a few just to see what it was about as a fresh cut flower a few years ago. And then you can see this was last year where we probably had 15 plants the year before, and they self-seeded and were all volunteers, and they just completely filled up the flower bed. And it was a really nice surprise or addition. So we cut them again as cut flowers to take in just to have something fresh on the table. So the more you cut these, the more they'll continue to produce. But just be forewarned, they do self-seed very rapidly. And then just a quick note, one flower that I know of for sure that you should try to avoid in the vegetable garden if you are planting cole crops would be cleome or cleome. So it can actually be a host plant for the harlequin bug, which is a stink bug that is a big pest on cole crops. So some other flowers that you may want to consider avoiding would be ones, of course, that you just don't enjoy or don't like, and then ones that are going to self-seed if that's something that you don't want happening in the vegetable garden. Just another quick note, again, I encourage you to try different things. This, of course, is not meant to be, this is what you have to do, or this is what it's just more or less a building block for something for you to think about and something to try. Flowers with cheap seeds are also good, I think, in my opinion, because it's more of an experiment. And if you seed them fairly thick, that might be a good way to, again, help smother out weeds and get some other good benefits. And I think, Sherry, I'm going to quit talking there and let you take over.
All right, thanks. Ashley, are you seeing my picture? Because I can't see it on my screen.
Yes, I can see your picture, but I can't see my own picture.
Ah, very good. Okay, just checking. All
Yeah.
right. So when you're going to combine your vegetables and your flowers, just or herbs, keep in mind that you need to put like needs together. So you want to make sure that the plants that you're putting together have similar requirements for light or moisture, whether they need well-drained soil or not. Most plants do. So just keep that in mind when you're combining things. Don't put a shade lover with a sun lover, unless, of course, you're underplanting that shade lover in some tall vegetable, such as a tomato. You can plant lettuce underneath of that. You might be able to find some other flower that is okay in the shade. Next slide. And this is an example of just combining herbs and a bunch of different herbs in one pot. So I have actually have some lettuce in there and sage and thyme. And I don't know if it was, I think it was parsley on the backside there. And this was my kitchen potager garden. So I just step out the door onto my deck and I'm able to snip off all these herbs that I need for cooking. So I thought it looked kind of attractive. So they can make attractive pots as well, you know, planters around your house. And we encourage you to check out our YouTube channel, which is University of Maryland Extension Western Cluster. A lot of words there. But Ashley is kind of the queen of herbs, and she's got some great videos up there about herb gardening. And I did a fun one on tea gardening, so you might want to check those out. And is there, I think that's about, okay, and the nectar sources, right? So there are many flowers out there and whether it be trees or shrubs or herbaceous plants that are nectar sources for quite a variety of insects and birds. And here's a nice list of them. In particular, notice that there are many trees that are integral in the lives of insects, and it'd be basswood and many fruit trees, hawthorn, maple, poplar, and your blackberries and raspberry are shrubs. They're also very important, as well as all these other flowers that are listed on here. All right. I think that brings us to the end. And just in the chat, I think most everything is answered. Although I want to backtrack a little bit. Someone asked if they planted marigolds with peas, if that was a mistake. So in our presentation, it says don't plant marigolds with peas and beans. So I answered, I never had a problem with that. And then I'm thinking back, you know what, actually I did. I didn't recognize that it was an interaction between the marigolds and peas, and I can't really prove that. I did get peas to germinate that were next to and grow that were next to marigolds, although I did not get very good germination. Now, can I blame it on the marigolds? I'm not sure, but we know that they put out allelopathic chemicals, so maybe that was the reason why. So as Ashley mentioned, you know, sometimes you just need to try things and see if they work out together or not. I mean, if your vegetable doesn't do very well, the year that you plant some kind of flower or herb next to it, then make note in a journal so that you can reflect on that the next year and say, maybe that wasn't such a good pairing, and try something different. So yeah, so I needed to backtrack on that about the peas. I think I may be wrong about that, because really considering what did happen when I did that. I mean, yeah, I got peas, but I didn't get as many peas. So so I just wanted to clarify that. Ashley is more of an expert on this topic than I am, and she's like, nah, but she is. So before we answer any more questions, we'd like to do a poll, and then we'd be glad to answer as many questions as you have. So Ashley, do you have that poll? Okay, so there's only 2 questions. So please take a moment and answer these so we can gauge how helpful our presentations are to you, and make sure to hit enter when you're done answering them.
And so there is question there in the chat about herbs that do not grow well together. And honestly, I just try to like annuals together and perennials together. But like Sherry said, I've never had any major issues. Sherry, do you have firsthand experience on that question?
No, but you know what? I think you have to be keyed into it, right? You have to be thinking that way to observe your plants and see this is not doing so well. Maybe it's because it's next to this other plant. I mean, I think half the time I'm a little bit oblivious, you know, so because I'm kind of new to this companion planting thing. No, I have not observed that, but I also wasn't looking for it. So.
Right. Yeah. So if you have a particular herb that you're looking for, I did try to put in the notes once you get the slides, you know, something that doesn't go well together. So I guess maybe just check that. And you will find that, you know, we had two different sources of information. We did use John Tronfeld's kind of like the basics of companion planting presentation. So all of these slides here at the beginning was from his work and his research. So, you know, it's possible that some of the information may be a little contradicting, and that's why I said it's hard to say hard and fast, these are the rules that you have to absolutely, you know, follow every time. So again, see what works for you. I've had good luck with the nasturtiums and radishes with my cucumbers.
Me too.
So that's what I tell people to start there if you know, want to start somewhere. And also tomatoes and basil are another easy, you know, one that you can guarantee you're going to do really well together.
And I have this book. Can you see it? Carrots Love Tomatoes. So, and that is, you know, a source of looking up different companion planting things. So, but like I said, or I don't know, Ashley, I mean, is there a lot of like actual university research on this?
No, I had a hard time finding any like University of Maryland or just general extension fact sheets that could go with it. West Virginia University does have one, a fact sheet. I can see if I can find that. And I'll drop that into the chat box. Sorry, I'm trying to type and talk and look at the same time. So I'm not that talented. Here, I'll drop this into the chat. Let's see, I might be able to share it. Let's see if my technological abilities will work. Here you go. So this is an extension university, West Virginia University companion planting website that's pretty good. And it tells you if, like friend or foe and what not to plant next to what. So that's a pretty good one. I will, as soon as I find my chat box, drop that into the chat box for you all.
All right.
All right, well, we thank you all for joining us. We do, you know, it's been quite a whirlwind of activity here these last few weeks, it seems like, with these classes. So we thank you for sticking with us and, you know, signing up and supporting us. And we always enjoy seeing everybody virtually, and it gives us a good opportunity to interact. So
yes, I hope you have a wonderful summer and get out there and grow some herbs and vegetables and flowers and just enjoy being outside. Thanks for joining us.
Yep, guys, take care.